I'm a researcher. I used to be an educator, but I'm not an educator anymore. So my job as a researcher is often to listen to people. And so what we're going to kind of finish off the day doing is giving you a bit of a chance to have a reflective discussion about all of this stuff that you've heard and what it might mean for your own context. So before we do that, I just want to talk for hopefully 5 or 6 or 10 minutes, and then you guys can get into small groups and have a bit more of an extended period to talk to each other. And then we'll finish off with Bill having a kind of facilitated discussion with everyone. So I am sure that all of you had a teacher that you've never forgotten, that inspired you, that influenced you. I'm sure, in fact, that many of you are those teachers for your students. My teacher was called Mr. Porteous. He was a teacher of English literature. And he had us write this on all of our notebooks. Whether fate be foul or fair, why falter I or fear, what should man do but dare? And that was really his motto for learning. And he really encouraged us to stick our head out, stick our neck out, as the saying goes, and try new things. Think about alternative endings for books. Think about different forms and content and ideas and how they connect to each other. And I still remember now, not only the quotation, which is also from Old English literature, like in the presentation before me, but I also remember the details of many of those conversations that we had in his class, long after I've forgotten everything that happened, to be honest, in my science, my maths, my geography class. I wish, we're here at the British Library, and I wish he was here so I could thank him, because he really inculcated a love of English literature whilst he was doing it. And these days, I spend a lot of my time talking to people about how we can embed creativity across educational systems, so it doesn't just depend on a lucky encounter with one extraordinary teacher, but it's something that every student knows that they're encouraged to dare and to create and to come up with new ideas as an integral part of their learning. So today I'm just going to tell you very briefly about the OECD project on fostering and assessing creativity and critical thinking, and then, as I say, we'll go on to talk about school-based approaches. So the project was an action research project. I'm sure you all know what action research is, but it's where you work with teachers to develop approaches and research practice in their own contexts. And you do that iteratively over several sessions so that people design approaches, and then they refine those approaches, they trial those approaches, they reflect on those approaches, and then you do it all again. So this was an action research project with 800 teachers in 320 schools in 11 countries. It started in primary and secondary education, and we went on to work in higher education and teacher education, trying to make that link between kind of school and higher education, and again, thinking about kind of system change. So if we go in and change teacher education, how is that going to change primary and secondary education? The objectives of the project were really, first of all, we provided professional learning, and then teachers went and instigated their own approaches to creativity and critical thinking, in fact, that worked for their own students, for their own context, for their own schools, for their own countries. And the objectives were really, first of all, to articulate a common international language, because it's still the case that many teachers actually find creativity quite scary. So we have all of these amazing models, and the rubrics that we developed are complementary to all of those models. But actually, when you talk to an ordinary teacher, sometimes they say, I'm not a creative person. I don't know how to develop creativity in my science class. I don't know how to develop creativity in my maths class. But yet, they're completely committed to learning how to do that, because they accept that students need to have creative approaches going forward. So we talked about an international language. We developed a bank of pedagogical resources on the basis of what teachers had done in their own context and made that available to the international community, along with some of the evaluation instruments that we use to monitor the effects of those pedagogical interventions. And we also thought about supporting policies and practices. And we were working with teachers, as I say, the teachers that are actually scared of creativity. And you can see that for them it involved either some or very much change in their understanding of what it entailed to develop creativity, in the way they prepared their lessons, in the way they designed their assessment tasks, and in the way they assessed work. So it was quite a big change for the teachers that we were working with. This is the rubric that we used. It's not circular, it's very complementary to everything that you've seen, but we broke creativity down into 4 subdimensions of inquiring, imagining, doing, and reflecting. And we looked at how students might be making connections to other concepts, either from within or from outside of the discipline, when they're inquiring. When they're imagining, they're generating and they're playing with unusual and even radical ideas, things that aren't conventional, things that not everybody might have thought of. When they're doing, they're producing, performing, or envisaging a meaningful output or a product that's personally novel. So novel to them as a student, not necessarily novel to the world. And reflecting on the novelty and the consequences of that solution. This looks linear. Of course, it's not linear, it's circular, but it's just set out like that because sometimes it's easier to read that way. We also developed assessment rubrics, and they were really about use in formative assessment. So they can be used in summative assessment, but they're really designed to allow faculty members, teachers, to discuss what progression looks like with students. And they're divided into process and product. So this idea that, yes, a creative product is really important, but so is a creative process. So what does that look like at different levels? What does it look like when it's kind of dormant, not quite activated? What does it look like when it's emerging, when it's flourishing, and when it's really outstanding? And in actual fact, we only have one assessment rubric that our teachers have tended to use this at primary, secondary, higher education, and teacher education, and just adapted it to whatever the level of the teachers, the students that they taught. So in some senses, it's a professional learning tool, because it allows teachers, first of all, to have that reflection, and then to work out how they can discuss that with their students in a kind of age-appropriate way. We've got cartoons that represent creativity and critical thinking visually. We make them available in 16 languages, and we're hoping to do that in more languages, because one of the things that we see when we work internationally is that whilst there are so many resources available in English, there aren't necessarily always resources available in Portuguese or in, smaller languages. We also have around 100 lesson plans that show examples of what it means to integrate creativity into different subject areas. And I should have said before that our rubrics, we have domain general ones, but we also have domain specific rubrics. So looking at what creativity looks like in science, for example. And these are lesson plans that were developed by teachers, and they can be used by teachers, but they can also be used more as inspiration or again, in professional learning as an example that then teachers go on to kind of design their own lesson plans. Some of them are just one lesson plan. Some of them are, for whole units. Some of the examples that we have, so in the primary level, there's one called The World Through the Eyes of Colours. And so you're teaching students about kind of colour theory, the colour wheel, colour vocabulary, but you do it by asking them, okay, what would the world look like through the eyes of the colour blue?
So start to talk to me about using all of your new colour vocabulary. Talk to me about, describe this through the eyes of the colour blue, and then draw a picture through the eyes of the colour blue. Write a story where the colour blue is the character of that story. We have a secondary one, for example, called My Region, Past and Present, which is where students are learning about history, and they learn about the history of a particular period, but then they also use counterfactual thinking to think about, okay, what if that had been different? What if those historical events had unfolded in different ways? And they start to, do all kinds of things like create plays and write stories, and look at artwork and what might have been different if things had been different. We make all of that available through an app that we're developing. Sorry, I need to step away from the microphone. I'll stand here. We're developing an app to make all of that available to the international community, and it's in its beta form, but it has sections on lesson plans, on rubrics, on resources that we've created from the internet that talk about creativity. We're going to have kind of professional learning paths and development in there. It makes all kinds of research and conferences available, and eventually it will also have some observation tools where teachers, again, as part of their professional learning, can observe lessons or reflect on their own teaching and think about how much creativity and critical thinking they're seeing in that lesson, and then compare it to other lessons. It's designed to be a kind of part of an ecosystem of learning. So part of, someone before me was saying not just kind of drive-by professional learning, but okay, let's have some professional learning, then let's provide this tool, you experiment with it, play around with it, see what works and see what doesn't work, and kind of as part of a program of learning. We are going to pilot that app, and so we're looking for volunteers of educators, a small group of educators that want to play around with the app whilst integrating some of those kind of teaching approaches into their teaching, and then meet in a webinar with each other from around the world and discuss what works and what doesn't work. So if any of you are interested in being involved in that pilot, please let me know, and I can tell you about the details of that afterwards. It's a 6 to 8 week commitment. But what I really want to talk about today is school-wide approaches, and in fact, I don't want to talk about them. I want to listen to you and what you have to say. I listened really carefully yesterday, I've listened really carefully today, and I rewrote my presentation several times. These are some of the things that I've heard that are really important to embedding creativity in a school context. Some of them probably don't belong in the same box as each other. Maybe they don't belong in boxes at all, but I would like to maybe rescue the humble box from all of its bad publicity and say sometimes a box is quite useful, right? You can kind of change things around, you can change the order of the boxes, you can stack the boxes, boxes are not that bad. So, these are some of the things that I've heard. We've heard about the importance of autonomy, of leadership, of having space and time centrally, of building a kind of collaborative and collegial culture across the school that might include collaboration with students and co-design with students so that you're supporting and empowering student voice. We've heard about the importance of really kind of in-depth, ongoing professional learning, communities of professional learning, perhaps even student-led, teacher-led, or student-led, why not? Professional learning, teacher-instigated professional learning. We've heard a bit about kind of consistent school policies, whether that be around progression, appraisal, all kinds of different school policies, and the importance of school environments. We've heard about the importance of the alignment between pedagogy, curriculum, assessment, and indeed kind of values and culture, and this idea of productive failure. So those are all things that we've heard about. But what I'd like you to get into small groups and discuss is more the how, okay? So we've heard about people having fire in their belly and a glint in their eye. So imagine I'm a school leader, and many of you are, or even a teacher, and I really want to embed creativity across my school, and I don't know where to start. What are some of the practical things that I need to do today and tomorrow and in a year to really embed creativity across that school? Who do I need to talk to? What do I need to write down? What initiatives do I need to start? So I want to invite you to get into groups of about 5 or 6 and change table so that you're working with some other people, but other than just choose your groups, and select a spokesperson, because we'll feedback at the end. Come up with at least 4 key actions, but many more if you want, that this person, or indeed you yourselves, can take to create and embed this whole school approach to creativity. We heard in the last session about the indicators of creative environments. We started to think about how you can make changes to a meeting next week. So now I want you to kind of bridge that and move beyond that and think about not just next week, but next month, next year. If there is some low-hanging fruit, make sure you note that, but also think about how that feeds into a broader strategy. If you have time, you can think about what support and resources people need, but we possibly won't have time to do everything. So I'm going to invite you to get into your groups. You have about 25 minutes to have a really in-depth discussion, and then we'll meet and feedback.